Behind me stands HaverHill House Asylum, the oldest mental asylum in the country, built in 1799, established 1802. It was even way ahead of its time, even before the revolutionary Brattleboro Retreat in Vermont, built in 1834. The history of HaverHill House is long and filled with many tales and spirit stories from beyond its gates. Its allure and interest has generated over 200 years of excitement and overall intrigue at this, America's first mental asylum. My crew and I will be exploring this massive asylum built on over 600 acres of land. The large buildings, small cottages, which still house many of its doctors today, and its modern, state-of-the-art mental health facility are only a glimpse at what the asylum has to offer patients. Within the walls lurk spirits who have recently become much more active. We're traveling with the medical administrator, Dr. Andrew White, who took over the facility in 2008. Throughout our journey, Dr. White has provided a rich history of the asylum, as well as many tales of its hauntings. I urge you to open your minds to the possibilities beyond our world. Dr. White himself is a conduit for spirits, and throughout the documentaries we will be sharing parts of our investigation into the spirit world. But first, let me welcome you to HaverHill House Asylum. Even before we began investigating, before we set up, we caught something rather strange and inexplicable, and it seemed to be targeted at Dr. White.
Master Doctor, I need you. Master Doctor, second floor, please.
We will play that for you again. Mind you, this clip did not need much cleaning up. It is a Class A EVP.
Master Doctor, I need you. Master Doctor, second floor, please.
Dr. White excused himself from our filming, presumably to take care of duties at the asylum. Meanwhile, we kept investigating and even went to that second floor. In 1799, Jack Haver and Josiah Hill, two businessmen from New York City, decided to buy some land in upstate New York for the sole purpose of creating a private town, and even more private asylum. The town was named Lyman Falls, and it has always been about tradition. The people like things to remain the same. For the most part, they do. Lyman Falls is named after the beautiful three-tier cascading waterfalls on the edge of town. Jack Haver and Josiah Hill began construction in 1799 on their grand HaverHill House Asylum. The people packed into the gates of the asylum, while relatives gobbled up prime real estate lots in the town to build the most beautiful mansions ever created. The people of Lyman Falls were all aware that their relatives who lived in that asylum, but just because they were sick, it did not mean that they needed to live in squalor and filth. The residents of Lyman Falls lived like kings and queens, overseeing the small town with endless meetings and rules. The town refused, for instance, to allow a church within its limits. It also refused for many decades industrialization of any kind. The shops that existed during that first year of 1801 remain today. A tailor, a blacksmith, a china shop, a European spa, a bank, a livery stable, leather maker, general store, and a shoemaker. There are some new ones since that first century, however, including a spirit burning shop which resides on Main Street, as well as several other gift and specialty shops for those visiting the asylum patients from out of town. There remains a historical society, a library that carries very few books of the modern day, a boarding house, and many, many houses that are for rent or for sale at a modest price. Very modest prices, some would say cheap. The families that once resided here have now passed on, and their grand mansions sit and wait for the next tenant to move in. We then took our investigation to the second floor to find out more about the mysterious EVP we discovered earlier, and what we found was shocking. Isn't that the lab of the mad Dr. Kenton Smith? And that's when we saw it. A shadow figure moving from left to right. Here it is again in slow motion. But the shadow figure alone was not the most shocking part of this video. When we slow down and enlarge this one section, right after the shadow figure leaves the screen, in the corner, you can see what looks like a face. Could this be one of Kenton Smith's, the Mad Doctor's victims? Or could it be the Doctor himself? There are many tales of spirits and hauntings that I have heard throughout my time with Dr. White and here at the asylum, as it is called by the staff and the residents. There are many different types of ghosts, such as strollers, spirits without names or histories, that simply were strolling through the worlds. And as the history twists and turns, the tales become grisly, filled with sadness, pain, and torment that many spirits experienced or inflicted at the asylum. The macabre practice of one doctor created a legend. One night, while we were in the laboratory on the second floor, Dr. White told us a tale of Dr. Kenton Smith, who hailed from Boston, Massachusetts. He studied as a surgeon and performed many autopsies back in Boston before heading to the asylum in 1915. He would be called incorrigible and ill-mannered at first, and then the town turned on him, as well as his patients at the asylum. Dr. Smith's experimental brain surgery did little to help his patients. His puncturing machine, which drilled 3 holes into the head of his patients, caused horrific pain and left the patients dead at the end of the ordeal. In 1922, the patients revolted against Smith. They were led out of their rooms by an orderly named Jameson Freed, a spirit that had contacted Dr. White. The patients took their revenge on Smith, mauling him until he lied motionless on the ground. It is then that Jameson Freed cleaned up the mess and somehow was able to return the patients to their rooms. Jameson buried Smith's body in the back courtyard, never to be seen again. Or so he thought. Smith's haunting was ended by Dr. White when a few months earlier of this year, the bones of Dr. Smith were uncovered. According to Dr. White, spirits cannot resist the temptation to reunite with their mortal selves. Smith wanted the bones. As Dr. White and his trusted friend and colleague, Dr. Tim Carlton, presented them in a burlap bag to him. However, Dr. White made certain that Smith's skull was not there. The removal of the skull was key to the destruction of Smith's spirit within the asylum. Without the head, Smith was enraged, but the spirit could not discover where his head had been buried. Dr. White had no knowledge since his colleague buried it, and Dr. Carleton's mind was protected by Dr. White, and the spirit could not force his way in. In the end, the other bones turned to dust as Smith reached for them. As Dr. White once told me, the spirit world is unforgiving to those who try to cross over without a conduit. The skeleton of Smith was incomplete, and therefore the destruction of Smith was final. The spirits of his victim came to reclaim him that night. He no longer haunted the asylum or the living. Bones of a spirit are very important. They reek of mortality and glisten with the life that was once and will never be again. We were about halfway through the asylum when we were sitting in one room that Dr. White admitted even gave him chills. We decided to try another EVP session. This time, Dr. White joined us. What we caught was disturbing. Is there anyone in this room? Were you treated well?
That's 22
Did you just hear that? I mean, I'm not wrong. You heard it, right?
I do not have anything.
God, these people must have gone through hell.
It's a nightmare.
Make me put them out.
And for some, it still hasn't ended.
Did you just hear that? I'm not wrong. You heard it, right?
I do not have any fingernails.
Do you understand how it hurts?
They make me pull them out. Make me pull them out.
Needless to say, we left the room shortly after that. In 1803, on Valentine's Day, Elizabeth Ellen Haver, at 16 years old, an inmate of the asylum for several years, committed suicide by jumping off the roof with a rope tied around her neck. It was the first death that occurred at the asylum. It would not be the last. Elizabeth Ellen Haver was born on November 15, 1786. Little Lizzie-Beth, as her family affectionately called her, arrived as the sixth and final child of Jack and Ellen Haver. Elizabeth had enchanted many of her parents' friends throughout her first years of life. Many called her the darling of Madison Lane. Lizzie-Beth was brought to Lyman Falls when she was only 12. This new town was to be a paradise away from New York City's bustling world. However, for the little girl, mystery surrounded her life in Lyman Falls. She became friends with Josiah Hill's son, Peter, who was only a year older than Elizabeth, but they seemed to have much in common. Elizabeth and Peter's friendship continued on in the asylum, as both were placed there by their own parents in 1802. Elizabeth Haver took to fits of rage, and her father claimed she was possessed by a demon. Peter Hill, on the other hand, was admitted and described as having a melancholy disposition with an inability to be touched in any way. He often moved into a corner of the examining room to escape his doctors. Elizabeth tormented Peter Hill in life and in death, according to Dr. White. The young man, even at 18, could not escape her enchantment, it seemed. Exactly 1 year later, Peter Hill, presumably so distraught over Elizabeth's death, went to the roof of the asylum and, using a hanging rope, threw himself over, ending his own life in 1804. These tragic deaths were only the beginning of HaverHill Asylum's madness, which still remains today. Although all was not lost for Peter Hill, Dr. White explained that he knew he could release Peter's soul from the asylum. I have no doubt he did just that. As for Elizabeth, her spirit continually torments Dr. White. While investigating one night, Dr. White cautioned us against the spirit of Elizabeth Haver, telling us we were not to invoke it without his presence. We agreed. It was getting late. Dr. White left to do his final rounds, and we were just about wrapping up when the most incredible event I had ever witnessed occurred. Now just remember that camera on the second floor. You got some cabling on the floor, and don't forget the tape. There's tape all over the stairs.
It is coming for all of us.
Master, Doctor, I have seen it. It is coming for you. It is coming for all of us.
Andrew.
It's reported that there are over 500 spirits within its walls. And it is my opinion that Dr. White is a transcendent, and that he can see into the world, interact, and cross over if need be. This story is far from over. It is my hope to one day return to HaverHill House Asylum and see what else might be lurking in the hallways or hiding in the shadows.
Dad had the gift of transcendence long before he ever made it known to even his own father and mother. You see, you have to understand, it's not something my father talked about much, even when I was younger. It was something we all just knew in our family. A spirit would appear and sometimes I would see it too. And then Dad, he would just push it away. Eventually, he had to push them all away from my mother. My mother hated those spirits. I can't blame her. They invaded whenever and wherever they wanted. My mother was a patient woman, but enough was enough, she would say. And then Dad shut them out of our house. Before Dad passed over, the spirits at HaverHill were very unruly at times. Dad tried to control them, but honestly, there was only so much he could do from here. From this world, I meant. I was very fortunate that I was able to spend far more time with my girls than my father could with my brother, my sister, and myself. It was different when AJ was born, my brother's son. He spent a lot of time with his grandson. He seemed happy to finally do that. I always believed my father's greatest regret is the times he missed with us and my mom. He had a job to do here at the asylum, both with patient care in this world and with spirit maintenance in the other. My dad didn't have a choice with either.
was dark, but it wasn't musty. This was a place that didn't go unused. I took out my phone and used it as a light. I continued down the corridor as I went deeper. It opened up into a stone circular room. There was a symbol on the floor and on the walls. I didn't recognize them. Candles were all around the symbol on the floor. They were burnt down, but still newer. Someone definitely was using this place. The candles were not the kind you could buy at the spirit burning shop in town. These were ritualistic and had markings on them. They looked homemade. I took pictures of everything, hoping once I was out, I could find out what the symbol meant. Then I saw it, perfectly propped on its own seat. A skeleton, sitting on a stone throne. It was eerie, to say the least. I took a quick picture and then went back down the corridor. I didn't want to be there any longer. Something about this place felt like death. I listened on the other side of the door for noise, but nothing came. Finally, I felt around for a lever or a button or something. I found it and pulled the lever down. The door opened, and quickly I walked out, closing it behind me. The war is here. The asylum is part of it, but we are all a part of it too. And those symbols and the candles and that room, they're all a part of it somehow. Andrew said the war was on both fronts. So I have to solve this one. And I can't solve it without my family. There are many mysteries in the asylum yet to be solved. Some I can see coming. Some I cannot. The Journal of Andrew White, June 22nd, 2008.
He keeps your world quiet. He keeps the spirits from attacking you. But be assured, Anne, it will not last forever. And sometimes you just trust him. It's easier.
Love me. Love.
Hello, Anne. Perhaps I can be of assistance with your little search for those symbols.
But how I'd like us to be friends. I know what she said, but she's lying.
Andrew.
Master Doctor.
His voice, hers.